We have 3 beats today, and they're going to come from our esteemed panelists. We have Teneshia Warner from Egami. We also have J.D. Michaels from BBDO. We have John Clinton from Edelman. I am Keith Cartwright. I'm the Executive Creative Director at 72 and Sunny, and I will be the moderator today. For once, I'm not on the panel, I'm moderating the panel, so this is actually going to be really fun for me. So we're going to start with a video that some of you may have seen. It's a really powerful video that came from Egami and BBDO, and we're just going to have a conversation about it, and that's what this forum is going to be about. Okay.
Who said that?
The lady at the store.
That is not a compliment.
Listen, it's an ugly, nasty word, and you are going to hear it. Nothing I can do about that. But you are not going to let that word hurt you. You hear me?
There are some people who think you don't deserve the same privileges just because of what you look like. It's not fair. It's not.
Remember, you can do anything they can. Difference is you gotta work twice as hard and be twice as smart.
Come straight home after practice. You got your ID? Yeah. In case I stop you. How's your review?
We're good.
You good?
Yeah,
You see?
we're good.
Okay. Good. Now, when you get pulled over,
I'm a good driver. Okay?
baby,
Don't worry.
this is not about you getting a ticket. This is about you not coming home.
I'm gonna be okay. Right? Okay.
It's not fair. But you keep showing up.
You are not pretty for a black girl. You are beautiful, period. Okay? Don't ever forget that.
Really powerful. So, my understanding is, Teneshia, that I think my mic's off, but I can talk really loud. My understanding is that you guys worked on the strategy and working on the insight that brought us to this wonderful piece of work. BBDO also worked with you and developed the work. Could you talk to us a little bit about the strategy and how you got to that insight?
Absolutely. So I'll give a little bit of background. Egami has had the opportunity to work with My Black is Beautiful for 9 of the 10 years of the platform's existence. My Black is Beautiful is a CSR platform that's owned by P&G that was actually started by 6 African-American women in the company. And essentially, they wanted to create a community for African-American women to talk about what it means to be Black in America, to have a safe place around having discussions with the way Black beauty was portrayed in mainstream media. So this was actually started in 2006, and the community grew from single digits to the largest community of African American women. It's 3.2 million across digital platforms, as well as online and social, and they are very engaged and vocal every day. If you go to the My Black is Beautiful channels, check out some of the conversations. And over the years, the platform, we rolled out a number of campaigns. However, it was a while since the platform had launched a new campaign, and we were brought to the table by P&G Corporate, as well as My Black is Beautiful, Mark Pritchard, who partnered Egami with BBDO. And the challenge was, we need to relaunch My Black is Beautiful, but in a meaningful way. Go back, tell us the territory that we need to be in, and feel free to push us. So we went back, and at the time, it was November of 2016, and we were going into 2017. And racial incidents were on the rise. I know if you guys remember University of Virginia, Charlottesville, killings of young black boys were on a rise, and not only killings, but just in general, racial incidents were rising. And what we realized was going on in the life of the African-American mom, who was the prime target, is many of those mothers were worried about the future of America and the state that their children had to be raised in. So we basically kind of knew that it was going to be a very provocative territory, and we went back to P&G. We conducted many focus groups, but I'll remember this moment. It was in December of 2016, where we just basically said, here's stories that are real life stories from African American women that are your target. So we told the story of one mother who had to basically talk to her child about what it felt like to be left up in, the child was actually left in a tree by all of her friends, and all of the friends ran away and were basically saying the N-word to her. And this was like all of a sudden, it was new for this particular mother. Another corporate executive had to scrub the N-word off of her mailbox before coming to work. And then there was another mother who decided that she felt it wasn't safe to send her child to a predominantly white institution anymore. She wanted to make the decision to send her child to HBCU because of the things that were happening at University of Virginia. So we told a lot of these stories in the meeting. And of course, the brand team was listening like, okay, these were very interesting focus groups. But there was a moment in this focus group, we said every one of those stories came from employees that work for you, Mark. And that was the moment of just jaw dropping, like, wait a minute. These are stories from our employees. And I really do think that was the moment in time when P&G knew that they were okay with entering into a conversation around the importance of ending racial bias. It was a lot of collaboration going back and forth between BBDO and Egami along the way. We visited many territories, but one in particular was this insight that African American parents had to have the talk, and unlike the talk in general market, you know, usually when you hear the word talk, you think about preparing yourself to talk about the birds and bees, right? But there was a unique talk that African American parents had to have to prepare their children for the moment when they were faced with racial bias in America. And once we uncovered that insight, we knew that was the territory we wanted to build in, and that's when we got an opportunity to collaborate with the amazing creatives at BBDO, and the challenge was, how do we bring this to life and reflect the reality that was going on in the homes of African Americans?
Yeah, and so JD, can you talk to us a little bit about the process of making this work?
Yeah, normally, well, everybody here is involved in advertising, so won't do that. Normally, you get a brief and you just brainstorm on the brief, and that happened. So there was a big brainstorming session. The secrets to why this worked for us came down to two different reasons. Number one, we've got a definition of diversity at BBDO that I decided is going to be the definition of diversity because I'm in charge of diversity now. So the definition of diversity is your unique combination of passions, choices, and experiences. That's it. More of us have something we hate every Thanksgiving that somebody makes, and you could raise your hand about it, and it wouldn't be color-based or background-based. More of us have an opinion about Justin Bieber than, you know, and it would bind us together in a way that race by itself would not, because that's something that's real for you and that you have passion for or against. The creatives who worked on this were part of our initial kind of push of this new definition of diversity. There's been a little pushback against it as well, that people, no, we've got more in common because we look together, and it's maybe not true. So these creatives had actually gone through this process of working with us and talking about this and making this real. The second thing is a meeting we had that kind of they initiated, where they brought together African American people at the agency, all in a room. I was on the phone. I was deathly ill at home. And if you think I'm chatty now, cold medicine really helps. And they brought everybody together to talk about their ideas and show them and get feedback. Now, normally a meeting like this would be a polite kind of talk about this and that, and oh, maybe you should do this. But they asked the wrong people into the room, because it's these guys that really wanted, and they made a point of it, saying, listen, we really want you to be completely, totally honest with us about this. So we were. The first two ideas they had, we said throw in the trash, they're ridiculous. And we said it like that. And we told them why, and they agreed. Now, normally you get creatives that have a little bit of an ego and would push back. They did not. Their third idea was good, but their fourth idea was the talk. And when we got to the talk, the thing that happened to the room is that we had plied their vulnerability by kind of trashing some of their ideas, nicely, but firmly. Then, in what happens when people have real conversations, we kind of destroyed our own vulnerability as well. Because when they talked about the talk, they did the same thing that I do every day. They intellectualized it. They thought about it in a way of how it relates to people, and not in a distant way, but in a way that these two guys, who really were cool guys that looked like they could have a skateboard shop over in Williamsburg, they had never had this experience, so they tried to deep dive into it as much as they could. So we consciously broke down that coping mechanism that we normally have. And that's what the hard part was, is that all of us just got real about it. And we talked about our own personal experiences of having the talk. And as we went through, we saw them break down by going, wait, well, where did you grow up? Was it in the South? No, not in the... Wait, how did you hear? Wait, but how old are you? And they were trying to find that category that this horrible thing would have to happen, and figured out from a room of people from 20 years old to 65 years old that were African American that lived all over the country had had the same talk. And when he figured it out, he started crying, and he had to sit down, both of them. And the account woman who was in charge also sat down, and he said, I'm gonna need a minute. I'm so sorry, wait, how could it be that all of you heard this same, I don't understand, was there a thing? And I said, dude, there wasn't a thing on TV, it wasn't an ABC after school special, it wasn't a thing. This is the way things are. Now, I intellectualize things a lot. I went to Yale. Today, I'm intellectualizing a great deal about race, if you go look in the paper, but that's for later. It's very strange because you just are used to it, because there's no other way that the world's gonna be, and you just think that this is the way it is, and you get used to it. But for someone who was not used to it, that moment where they broke down, I got to say, so where you are right now, sitting down, unable to stand, that's where this has to go. If you can't do that, don't do it. Do the third idea. It's great. But if you can do that, that's the ad. Because that's my mom, that's gonna affect my mom, that's gonna affect me, that's gonna affect people I don't know, that's gonna affect people who would not let me in their door, but have been marginalized in some way that they, on a human level of passion, experience, or choice, are gonna see, oh man, yeah. And after the ad was made, and we showed it at BBDO, I got the experience of talking to a young man from Atlanta, Caucasian man, big lumberjack kind of guy. He goes, yeah, that ad, yeah, it's interesting. I don't think I get it. And I was like, how much do you weigh? Well, like 310. Has anybody ever talked to you about your weight? I mean, you're here and you're in New York and we're all super cool. Williamsburg. I mean, does anybody ever made fun of you? And he sat down. That's what that is. That's why that's good and still makes me cry. It's that everybody got vulnerable. Everyone. And got to that point, and that's what they put on screen. There's no ego in that. There's no hubris. It's real because it's real. That's it. And in a world with so much fluff and sizzle and no steak, it stands out even better.
That's great. The thing that I always asked myself when I saw that work is, through the process, what were some of the hurdles? Because it's always great, as we all know, in the room, we come up with a great idea, everyone's shaking their head, and then as you start to get to the make, and you start to get closer to putting it out in the world, there's trepidation. and fear, especially with a client as big as P&G. And I love Mark too, but he runs the biggest company, and he holds the largest marketing budget in the world. So can you talk about freely some of the things that you had to come up against to protect this work?
Down to the wire of everything. And this is David Lubar's credit to him. When he had rough cuts, he would just grab us and bring us in the office, all the people who were working on it. Also, all the African-American people that actually consulted on us, he would grab, some of those people were account people or and he would grab us and say, hey, come here and look at this. And he would look for that sit-down thing. Anything that pulled from that got cut out. Anything that was just deviating from that got cut out. Seconds of stuff. That's what he fought for. And so that's why, for us, David just was a champion of that feeling from the beginning to the end.
And on our side, I think a number of things. Early on, once we landed on the talk and we presented it, I can remember being in a conversation with executives, and of course Mark was there, where we said, look, if you're going to do this, we need to know that there's a long-term commitment. And we started to paint for him, here's what backlash will look like for you. And we wanted to give him real scenarios of, if your consumers call for a boycott, if your consumers, deny that this is the reality, are you going to stay the course? Dates are really big in my mind. I don't know why I know this was December 15th, 2016, but that was the day of the meeting. And we just called out that we need this commitment to be long-term. So they both agreed that, yes, we will stick the course. A lot of testing occurred, and not only testing in focus groups, but I would really say we co-created with the community. So once we got the piece, we actually invited influencers, Michaela Angela Davis, Angela Rye. I'm sure you guys have seen Angela on CNN, who's a huge activist in the African-American community. We flew influencers and community activists and community leaders to P&G to say, we want to show you a piece that we're going to go out with, and we want to get your feedback and response. So by co-creating with the influencers, a lot of the community leaders kind of felt that this is going to be up to us to lead the discussion when you guys come out with this. Thank you for thinking enough about me for inviting us into the conversation. And we also open up for real dialogue. So inside of that conversation, one community activist looked at P&G and said, look, if you're coming out with this, are you ready to walk the walk and talk the talk? We want to know about your inside numbers. How many African-American women do you have as a part of your C-suite that's on your board? And before you come out, defending and taking a stand on racial bias, how does your home look in the inside? And that was, a big moment for some of the multicultural employees that said, hey, I think we need to pause, and we need to make sure that our internal story track is right. We need to make sure that the employees internally feel that this company is not only striving to be culturally competent externally, where it matters for their sales, but they care also in the inside. So the date for this launch changed so much as we were co-creating along the way with the community and influencers, because right when we thought, okay, we have it all together, we would listen to a community leader that says, oh, no, you don't. And so you need to get this in order before you go out. So a lot of postponing happened. I think it was about a 9-month process before we felt that the company was even ready to take a stand and had the right message track, that they were doing enough internally to release it. Some other things is we really had to counsel the client on when this dialogue starts, you need to know your role. You're not necessarily all of a sudden the authority on racial bias. You need to know that you're facilitating this conversation by basically shining a light on something that African Americans already know. So for the primary target, which was the African American woman, this piece said to her, P&G, you get me, you see me, thank you. But that wasn't the only target. the target needed to be audiences that were not African American that did not know this talk was happening. And so that really guided our media strategy. It guided the communities and influencers we work with, because it was important that mainstream media got access to the talk, because we knew the talk was happening. And that was something we heard over and over, like, please don't tell me what I already know. But if you're joining forces with me to shine a light that this talk needs to stop, then let's do this. And so we counsel them that you're facilitating and let others lead the conversation. And that essentially is what happened. It really took off virally without paid media around it. The 3.2 million women that's a part of the African American, the My Black is Beautiful community, shared it, talked about it, and it was really more so viral, where the conversation was owned by influencers and by the community, and P&G's role was to facilitate. And those are some of the big key learnings.
No, that's great. Last question on this. During testing and research and even through the council, was there a conversation about African American men not being a part of the conversation and being in the piece? Was there backlash? How was that handled?
Yes, it was, and I know you can join in here. It was a lot of conversation on the role of the African American man in the piece. Why was the male voice not more prominent? And the answer to that, where we landed, and a lot of outsiders did not know this, so it's very important to clarify. The primary target for this was an African American woman. Remember, My Black is Beautiful was relaunching the platform and needed to engage with the African American mother. So this piece was designed to say to the African American mom, we see what your unique experience is. Now, we know by far that the African American mom is not the only one having the conversation, that African American men and males, and having it with her son and fathers, there's a lot of territory where this can go. I can tell you that the company it's committed, and you can look forward to the future to seeing a piece that is more dedicated through the lens of the African American man. So that was the point of clarification that many outsiders did not know, is that the start was to resonate with what the unique experience was for African American mother, but P&G realizes that the male is a part of the conversation. The father is a strong force in the AA home. And we will be looking at unique biases through the lens of African American men future forward.
Okay, that was great. We're now going to move on to another conversation, the Trust Barometer that has been with Edelman for how long, John?
For 18 years.
18 years. So John is going to take us through what the Trust Barometer is and how it works and how it's been working.
This is a unique experience for me, being the research guy on the stage. Usually I'm presenting creative or telling a wonderful story about how it was made and getting into the behind the scenes, but that was so well done. I'm just presenting the research today. This is the Trust Barometer is the largest study of trust in the world. It's 18 years old, it's 33,000 people. And this year was the most startling year that we've seen in the 18-year history. And basically what we saw in the U.S. was a collapse in trust in all of the institutions. So if you look at the top line, you go across it. Top line is informed public. Informed public are media literate, higher paid, higher education. And general population is everybody else. What we do is we measure trust in NGOs, business, government, and media. And if you look at that top line, you had a 22-point drop in NGOs, you had a 20-point drop in business, a 30-point drop in government, and a 22-point drop in media. So much of what you are seeing is really been quite predictable. People just don't trust the institutions that they've always had trust in. So how does that tie to brands, and how does that tie to companies? If we first look at companies, and the way to get at business is looking at trust in CEOs. 70% of those respondents say they want their CEOs should take a lead on change rather than waiting for government to impose it. So it does make sense for P&G to get involved. It does make sense for companies, and people are expecting it. It may not be a choice for much longer. You may have to say, this is my position on the stand, or this is what I'm against. And if you look at this side of the chart, it says, for CEOs, building trust is a top priority. And what you see is the second most important thing a CEO is charged with is building trust in the company. So the next slide shows us, excuse me, that CEOs are now expected, and therefore companies are expected to inform conversations and policy on debate and issues. So you've got 84% of people expect CEOs to get involved. And if you look at the rankings, that's everything from jobs to economy to automation to globalization to discrimination, healthcare, cost of living, education. So those are the things that Americans expect CEOs to weigh in on. And what we saw this year, because trust collapsed less in business, is there is a greater expectation that CEOs will get involved. Now I'm going to switch to a different study that's called the Earned Brand Study that looks at trust in brands. And what this shows us is a brand's stand now matters more than ever. 51% of people are actively buying or boycotting brands based on a brand's position or on a social issue. How many people remember what happened with Uber? Uber comes out, makes those incredible comments, and then all of a sudden people are boycotting Uber right away. So people are either choosing to go to a brand or choosing to go away from a brand based on the stance that people are taking. What's even more important is that's growing really quickly. 31% of people say they do it more now than they did 3 years ago. So this isn't going away. This is getting more and more important. If we go to the next slide, it shows us, and this is the same universe, but 50% of the people are now identifying themselves as belief-driven buyers. 30% are leaders and 17% are joiners. But those are people who are buying brands based on what their belief is of that brand. So what their position is. And that, again, I don't think that was prevalent 10 years ago. It used to be that, well, that's a social issue. That's for government to deal with. Now we're saying, no. Government's not going to deal with this. We expect business, we expect business leaders, and we expect brands to take a position on things. So the next slide shows that if you do take a stand, you have 8 times more chance of selling your product amongst that 50% of people. So what that's saying is people will reward you for taking a stand. And finally, what we see is being in the PR business, I think the biggest thing we always heard for years was just keep us out of the press. Just don't, we want to keep our heads down. That's not an option anymore. 70% of people will not buy a brand because they went silent on an issue. It was fascinating. I was out in Silicon Valley the day after the immigration announcement, and we went into a tech company, and I've never seen such diversity. Just from around the world. And you're sitting there going, how can these guys keep quiet on immigration? 65% of their employees must be immigrants. The employees will demand of the company, never mind the public. So what you see, and to me, strategy has always been about choice. Choosing to do something and choosing not to do something. And they're both equally important. And that's what this information is telling you. You can't go out of context and take a stand on something that has nothing to do with your business, nothing to do with your brand. But if it does have something to do with your brand or has something to do with your employees or has something to do with your customer base, then in all likelihood, and increasingly, you are going to have to take a stand.
Thank you. That was great. A question that when I went through and saw the data that popped in my mind, you look at brands like Pepsi and Starbucks.
Yep.
Starbucks most recently going through a crisis moment. They're closing their doors on the 30th to do a diversity and inclusion seminar to have a conversation internally. But is that enough, is the question I have for everyone here. And then what do you do after that? How do you respond when, as a company, you go through a crisis like this?
So my diversity partner at BBDO, Carla Mayers, I'm sure she won't mind me telling you this personal story, this week came in and put a piece of paper in front of me, just, I guess, yesterday. And I said, "What's this?" And she told me a story that a young boy at her son's school, she has 3 sons, had an altercation that seemed to be sort of racial, and everybody jumped in to react, and then yesterday she was given this note written in the handwriting of the 7-year-old kid saying, "I am sorry, and I did not mean to say bad things about him because of race. I just meant he was little." And so I opened it and I said, "Well, this is whatever the opposite of heartwarming is, but, there you go." And she goes, "I don't know how to feel about it, because I understand that you do something wrong and somebody sits down and tells you it's wrong and you write a letter that it's wrong and you give it to someone, but I don't know that's our normal thing that we do. And I'm not sure if this helps. I'm not sure if maybe I should invite him over for a picnic and they should talk and play and he should learn that these kids are the same. I just feel like this is a teaching moment that we've turned into an exercise." And a couple of hours of listening to someone say you should be nice to people is a great exercise. But does it say that the brand believes that you should behave in this way or you can't be part of our brand? I think what a lot of people are looking for is, here's what we're going to do. We're not going to bring in someone to talk about bias. You can believe what you want. It's America. But if you treat a customer in this way, you will be immediately fired. Now we know what the brand thinks. And I think that brands have to have, corporations are people. People have opinions. And in these days, your brand will come to you saying definitely what they don't want to be represented by. So then they need to lean forward and tell us what they do want to be represented as.
So you see it as being honest, transparent, and have a conversation about who they are.
I think they need to not have, the problem with us having conversations about this all the time is then we don't have anything, conversation is not decision. So there needs to be a decision. The reason it's easy to go to the government for stuff is when they're done discussing, they make a law. And you can go to jail for it or get sued. Yay! I think that is comforting to people. My mom, as she travels across the country, if she ever goes anywhere, she looks in the kitchen to see if there's black people there because she's 75 years old. And she wants to go to the bathroom to walk by to make sure that they see that she's there because she knows if she gets sick in this place, she can sue them. So they probably won't poison her. That is the fun world my mother lives in. Happy Mother's Day, Mom. But there's a logic to that. There's a logic that there's a law. And the reason you won't do it even if you don't like someone is that there's a consequence. The problem is passion without consequence doesn't equal anything. That's not your personality.
What about having, this takes us back to the talk, which again I think is a wonderful piece, but without action, do these conversations, in your opinion, have less impact? I think Egami did this amazing thing by making sure that this had weight so that this was the consequence. They knew, when people saw it, there's no way you thought, oh, well, they just did this haphazardly. The weight of the piece and the way that it was presented showed that the piece itself held the consequence of doing this, that this was the moment that they were taking a stand, and it felt that way. And that's why it works. That's why it's such a passionate, incredible thing to have, and why everybody that's seen it has the same sort of reaction. This is great. We're going to open it up for questions. Before we do, we're going to show, my dad is a minister, and he said before you close out anything, make sure you pepper the room and charge the room up. So we're going to do that with a music video that came out last week from Childish Gambino. I think it's relevant for this conversation, and I want to make it a part of this conversation, and we're here for questions. All right. Questions? Anyone?
I watch that 3 times a day, like a vitamin pill. No brand would sponsor that, but that's my brand. Almost in the cowpoke Sense brand. That's my brand. So if there was a, quirky black guy brand, that's the video I sponsor. I would give $1 for that. Again, it has weight to it because it is vulnerable and honest. And even if the imagery, every time I watch it, there's stuff in the background I don't see, but every single step of it is honest. Nothing goes so far as to push it into sensationalism, even though it seems that way at first. Because what seems sensational there is just reenactments of things that have actually happened that I've had to get up and watch on my phone and try to keep my kid from seeing every day. So it's important that everybody in this room, no matter what you're doing or where you're leaving, when you leave here, don't just think, oh, this was really great, and maybe we can insert some of this into our work this year. Keep the authenticity. And if it's not my story, it's your story. You're a woman, you're from the South, you grew up with a single parent, you've been abused, you haven't been abused, but you care about, you've adopted a kid, something is real. If you can put that in front of your work, particularly now, I would really appreciate it on a personal level.
I think that's a great point, and I think this is the Creative Summit, and I just find that to be an incredible creative piece. Yes, it's talking about a very specific subject matter, but we dig into these dark, deep, personal places in order to find creativity. And there are so many people out there who have these stories that are locked up because they're not invited in the room. So I'm going to stop being the moderator for a second and talk. But the thing that I love about this piece is the range of emotions that it takes you through. And I think the importance of this piece is that he sets you up at least 3 or 4 times. You expect something to happen because of norms, because of the way that society has propagated our people in society, and then he takes it down. And I think that range of emotion is what's beautiful and what's interesting and what creativity is about. So I love that. I just threw that in the end. But I think the work from the talk and all the work that's being produced and created, because I believe we as American people actually do care. We are a country of open arms based on an ideal, right? This is not a country that is white. We are born on an ideal. And that I think we will come around. I have a quote. There's a quote from Winston Churchill that America will do the right thing once they've exhausted everything wrong first.
I would make one point. I think we're moving into an age when content, as we call it now, is being sponsored by companies. So I like the fact that the least connection you can make is they spent the money to make this. The Shadow by Blue Coal. I'm not quite that old. I am that old. But that when you start to get these wonderful combinations of products and that support, I think we're going to see a lot more of things like this. And just the fact that they were behind it to support it is going to be a valid thing in the minds of consumers, I think.
We've run way over. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I want to thank everyone here. Have a good Creative Summit.